take for our subject a case which is not really one of the secrets of Scotland Yard. Today's subject, for instance, which we call the case of the kindly doctor. To begin with, it took place some 90 years ago, in 1859. By the way, Percy, how old is Scotland Yard?
It's a good deal older than that, Clive. In fact, you can trace its history right back to the Bow Street runners. One of these days, we might tell the story how Scotland Yard began.
That's a good idea, Percy. But Scotland Yard didn't come into the case of Dr. Thomas Smethurst. In fact, from the point of view of the police, the case of the kindly doctor was all too simple. However, when the trial began, or rather the trials, the fur really started to fly.
You're right, Clive. The trials of Dr. Smethurst are among the classics of English legal history.
When you hear his story, I think you'll agree that Dr. Smethurst was the kind of doctor whose bedside manner was certainly quite unique. Such a nice, kind doctor. The Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, London, Thursday the 7th of July, 1859. Dr. Thomas Smethurst is charged with the willful murder of Isabella Banks. Mr. Sergeant Valentine makes the opening speech for the Crown.
The charge I am about to prefer is one of a most serious character. The allegation is that the accused at the bar took away the life of a fellow creature by poison. The accused is a man of information and learning, and he availed himself of the knowledge he possesses and made use of a slow and irritant poison, which he administered himself. Probably you will be of opinion, when you have heard the evidence, that every means was taken by him from the beginning to shroud the whole affair in the deepest mystery.
When our story begins, the romantic Dr. Smethurst is living with his wife, a woman considerably older than himself, at a very respectable lodging house, number 4, Rifle Terrace, Bayswater. It was while he was living there that Miss Isabella Banks first met the doctor. Miss Banks was a lady of respectable family and possessed property to the extent of £1,800. She also had a life interest in £5,000, which on her death went to the other members of the family. This is rather an important point, as you'll realize later. A friendship soon sprang up between Dr. Smethurst and Miss Banks. Friendship is perhaps rather a mild word for it, because some weeks later their landlady found it was necessary to have a word with them both.
Now, Dr. Smethurst, I've been waiting for a chance to speak to you for some time, and I think it's just as well that Miss Banks should be present.
Well, really, Thomas, if you'll excuse me.
No, dear, I think we should hear what she has to say.
I haven't got much to say, but it's to the point. I simply will not allow such goings-on. There's your dear wife upstairs, Dr. Smethurst, and you downstairs up to I don't know what.
And what do you propose to do about it?
Just this. Miss Banks has got to go. I'll give her till the end of the week, but after that I shall be obliged if she'll find fresh lodgings. I'm not going to ask you to leave, Dr. Smethurst. You and Mrs. Smethurst have been here some time. But these are my final words to you, Miss Banks. You've got to go.
And so she went. But a fortnight later, Dr. Smethurst made his departure too. And if you and I had visited a church in the neighborhood of Battersea on the 9th of December that year, you might have been present at a touching little ceremony.
Repeat after me. I take thee, Isabella, to my wedded wife, to have and to hold.
I take thee, Isabella, to my wedded wife, to have and to hold.
From this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer.
From this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer.
In sickness and in health, to love and to cherish.
In sickness and in health, to love and to cherish.
Till death us do part.
Till death do us part.
Till death do us part. Well, as matters turned out, Dr. Smethurst had only some 6 months in which to concentrate his loving and cherishing, because by May the 2nd, Isabella Banks was dead. But we're going a little too fast. The so-called marriage took place in December, and in April, Louisa Banks, sister of dear Isabella, had a letter from Dr. Smethurst. It was marked
private and confidential. Dear Miss Banks, your dear sister wishes me to request the favor of your calling upon her as early as convenient, as she is really very ill and desires to see you. She also wishes me to say that you will greatly oblige by coming alone. Rail from Waterloo Station about every half hour, and Richmond buses from the White Horse Cellar, Piccadilly, about as often. Yours sincerely, T. Smethurst, 10 Alma Villas, Richmond Hill.
When Sister Louisa arrived, she found Isabella in bed, in a very feeble state.
Isabella, my dear, what's the matter?
Oh, don't say anything about it. It'll be all right when I get well, won't it, dear?
Yes, it'll be all right soon.
But what is being done about it?
She is having the very best medical attention.
Yes, Dr. Julius from Richmond comes to see me every day, and now there's another doctor coming as well, Dr. Bird. But I'm afraid I'm still sick, sometimes several times each day. But when I get well, all will be right, won't it, dear?
Yes, my dear. It's just a matter of time.
Time was running short. For on the 30th of April, a Saturday, Dr. Smethurst visited a solicitor of Richmond, Mr. Senior, taking with him a draft in his own handwriting of a document of some importance.
Mr. Senior?
That's my name.
I've come to see you, Mr. Senior, to find out whether it would be possible for you to come up the hill to the lodgings at which I'm residing in order to make a will for a lady.
Why, certainly. I could, if necessary, come at once.
No, not today. Today would not be convenient. It would have to be tomorrow. I'm afraid the lady will be too ill to see you this afternoon.
But today is Saturday. I presume you mean you would like me to come on Monday?
No, I mean tomorrow.
I must say,
Dr. Smethurst.
I must say, Dr. Smethurst, I don't like doing business on Sunday. And for that matter, the law doesn't like wills being executed on a Sunday. But I suppose if it's a question of necessity, I shall have to do it.
I have with me a draft of the will. It was drawn up by a barrister friend of mine in London. As a matter of fact, the lady wished to write it herself. But I thought it would be better to be done by a professional man.
Right. Let me have a look at it, will you?
This is Mr. Senior, my dear. The gentleman who's come to make your will.
Yes, my dear, of course. I have the paper here.
Let me give it to Mr. Senior, Isabella, dear.
Yes.
Thank you. This is the document we drew up on Saturday.
It is?
It will be necessary to have another witness.
I'll ring for the daughter of our landlady. Meantime, perhaps you'll read the will. Would you like to hear it, dear?
It's not really necessary. I've read it.
Nevertheless, I think you should hear it again.
This is the last will and testament of me, Isabel Banks, now residing at number 10 Alma Villas, Richmond, in the county of Surrey, spinster. I give and bequeath to my beloved friend Miss Jenkins of Walthamstow, Essex, my brooch set with brilliants and pearls and containing the hair of my late father. And as to my real and personal property, estate and effects, whatsoever and wheresoever, and of what nature or kind soever the same may be, I give, despise, and bequeath the same unto my sincere and beloved friend Thomas Smethurst, Doctor of Medicine, now also of number 10 Alma Villas, Richmond, aforesaid, for his own use absolutely forever. I hereby appoint the said Thomas Smethurst sole executor of this my will.
By this time, Dr. Julius had started to become a trifle suspicious. Miss Banks showed no signs of improvement. She was constantly sick, and the doctor suspected that some irritant poison was being given to her. He mentioned this to his partner, Dr. Bird, and as Miss Banks still did not improve, decided to call in Dr. Todd, a well-known consultant attached to King's College Hospital. He agreed with the diagnosis of poisoning, but no trace of poison could be found. A second examination was made, and arsenic was discovered. Dr. Smethurst was arrested and charged with
feloniously administering poison to one Isabella Banks.
Your worship, I protest. I've been arrested in my own house and brought before you on this ridiculous charge.
Be silent.
But this lady is in the gravest condition. I've been forced to leave her at a critical moment. I must ask to be allowed to return to her at once, this evening.
And, strangely enough, the magistrate granted Dr. Smethurst's request. He was allowed bail and hastened back to the bedside of Isabella. He was not, however, allowed to interfere in any way with her treatment. On the following morning, she died. It was in these circumstances that Dr. Smethurst faced his trial at the Old Bailey on the 7th of July, 1859. From the very start, it was dramatic. On the second day, one of the jurymen fell ill, and the first trial had to be abandoned. In August, Dr. Smethurst came up for trial again. One after another, the doctors gave their evidence.
I am physician to King's College Hospital. Dr. Julius told me the nature of the case before I saw the deceased, but he did not tell me his suspicion that irritants were being administered to her. When I saw the deceased, I noticed a peculiar expression of countenance, an expression of terror, as though she was under the influence of someone, and that was not in accordance with the appearance of a patient suffering from an ordinary disease.
During my practice, I've seen many cases of acute dysentery of an epidemic character. In my opinion, none of the symptoms exhibited by the deceased was a proof that she died of acute dysentery. I'm of the opinion that her death was the result of some irritant poison having been administered to her.
Witnesses were called to tell the whole sordid story of the doctor's relationship with Miss Banks. The solicitor gave evidence concerning the rather unfortunate circumstances in which her will was made. Everything seemed to tell against Dr. Smethurst. Louisa, her sister, for instance, told of her first visit to Richmond.
I went upstairs and found she was very much altered, but she knew me and she put out her hand and tried to speak. I was unable to do so. I only remained in the room a few minutes. Dr. Smethurst was there all the time. I'd taken some soup with me for my sister, but the accused said it was too strong for her, and he mixed some warm water with a portion of it. Dr. Smethurst then said he'd take it downstairs to cool, and he left the room for about a minute. When he returned, he gave the soup to my sister, and she was very sick. I only saw her once after this. As Dr. Smethurst told me, she could not bear me in the room.
A critical moment of the doctor's trial occurred when Dr. Taylor, the analyst, was giving evidence concerning the first discovery of arsenic.
I next examined the medicines that had been supplied by Dr. Julius and found that they contained the ingredients of which they were represented to be composed. I examined another bottle, number 21, which appeared to contain a clear watery liquid of a saline taste, and I tested a portion of the contents by a Reinsch's test. And upon first trying the copper, it was entirely consumed. I made a further test, which led me to suppose that there was arsenic present in the solution.
Which led you to suppose?
Yes.
And this was the evidence you gave before the magistrates when Dr. Smethurst was first charged?
That is correct.
But since then, you have made a further statement.
Yes. It turned out that I was mistaken, and that it did not contain either arsenic or antimony, but that the arsenical appearances originally produced came from the copper galls.
That little mistake over bottle number 21 was the first hint that perhaps things were not quite as black as they looked for Dr. Smethurst. If ever a man was confronted by damning evidence, it was the nice, kind doctor. But as yet, little had been said in his defense. By the third day of his trial, all London was consumed with interest to learn the outcome, for by the third day, evidence of a strange and unexpected kind was to be brought forward. Dr. Smethurst, it appeared, might still have the ace up his sleeve. On the third day of the trial of Dr. Thomas Smethurst, counsel for the defense, Mr. Sergeant Parry, rose to make his speech.
After having undergone the agony of a double trial and having endured for a long period the accumulation of prejudice that has been cast upon him, the unfortunate gentleman at the bar has at last the opportunity of laying before a jury of his countrymen the defense he has to offer upon this most serious charge. What is the charge against the accused? It is that he inveigled the unhappy lady into his power, and that he basely and cruelly murdered her for the sake of her property. I believe that the will made by the deceased was the entire foundation for this charge, and that no charge would have been made against the accused if this will had not been executed. Supposing, however, that the will was to be taken as evidence of a motive, what was that motive? It was that he had perpetrated this crime to obtain possession of about 17 or 1800 pounds. But he would equally have come into possession of it if the deceased had lived, for it was clear she was deeply attached to him, and that she had handed over to him the dividend that she received in April. While she lived also, she was entitled to a life interest in £5,000, and the accused would have had the benefit of that also. And therefore he had a much stronger motive for her to live than he had to destroy her.
Having disputed the motive, the defense now moved on to even more controversial ground, for just as the prosecution had called one medical witness after another, the defense retaliated.
I am a doctor of medicine, a licentiate of the College of Physicians, and professor of anatomy at the Grosvenor Place School of Medicine. I have heard the evidence as to the symptoms of the deceased, and in my opinion, they are not reconcilable with a case of slow arsenical poisoning. There was an absence of several symptoms I should expect to find in such a case.
I'm a doctor of medicine and a lecturer on practical and experimental chemistry. I've heard the evidence of the symptoms exhibited by the deceased and the appearances presented upon the post-mortem examination. And according to my opinion, all these symptoms are consistent with the deceased having died a natural death. And, in my opinion, she died of dysentery.
There was a further complication when the medical witnesses revealed that Miss Banks was expecting a child. One way and another, the doctors managed to contradict each other with alarming frequency. All the circumstances were against Dr. Smethurst, but the medical evidence on which the case really rested was not conclusive. Dr. Smethurst could have poisoned Isabella. In fact, it very much looked as though he had. But, and it was a big but, it seemed equally possible that he hadn't. The judge, in his summing up, went very fully into all the evidence given in the case, occupying some 9 hours in his address to the jury. He pointed out to the jury the basis on which they must consider their verdict.
Gentlemen, are you agreed upon your verdict?
We are.
How say you? Is the prisoner guilty or not guilty?
It is my painful duty to record him guilty.
I swear to God that I'm perfectly innocent.
Dr. Smethurst was then called up for judgment. Before being sentenced, he spoke from the dock for over half an hour. His speech contained a number of inconsistencies to which the judge drew attention before saying,
I think you must be perfectly aware that if the whole of it were true, it could not interfere with the painful and awful duty I have to discharge. And it remains for me only to pass the sentence of the law, which is that you be taken to the place from whence you came, and from thence to a place of execution, and that there you be hanged by the neck until you be dead, and that your body be afterwards buried in the prison in which you were confined previous to your execution. And may the Lord have mercy on your soul. The execution of the judgment of the court is committed to the sheriff of the county of Surrey, where the offense was committed.
I declare Dr. Julius to be my murderer. I am innocent!
But this was not the end of the story, for the sentence of Dr. Smethurst brought forth a fresh wave of interest and indignation. The Times was full of letters from doctors, lawyers, and people from every walk of life, including even a letter from Dr. Smethurst's legal wife, who protested his innocence. There was no doubt about it. Whether you believed the doctor was guilty or innocent, there was quite a lot of evidence to support your story. Too much evidence to make the verdict as clear-cut as a verdict should be in an English court of law. All the letters and all the petitions poured into the office of the Home Secretary, and surrounded by so many conflicting opinions, the Home Secretary decided to rest his case on one opinion. He sent all the evidence and all the documents to a personal friend, and the foremost surgeon of his day, Sir Benjamin Collins Brodie, who, after considering the case, replied,
My dear sir, having carefully gone over the papers which were forwarded and relating to the trial of Thomas Smethurst, I send the conclusions at which, using my best judgment, I have been able to arrive. Smethurst's indifferent moral character rendered him a just object of suspicion. 2. There is really no trustworthy evidence of Miss Banks having taken arsenic, and indeed, many of the symptoms which it is well known arsenic produces were absent in Miss Banks's case. 3. Since his conviction, nothing has been found to show that Smethurst had purchased poison at any chemist's, or that he had taken any other means of procuring it. 4. It is rather in Smethurst's favor that although the period of her death was uncertain, the will under which he inherited Miss Banks's property was not made until within a very short time from the fatal termination of her illness. Taking into consideration all that I have now stated, I own that the impression in my own mind is that there is not absolute and complete evidence of Smethurst's guilt. I am, dear sir, yours faithfully, D.C. Brodie.
For a great many years, Monday had been the day upon which executions took place in the county jail. But as this meant the erection of the scaffold on the top of the jail on Sunday, adverse criticism led to the alteration of the day to Tuesday. And, according to the custom of the time, Tuesday fortnight was fixed for the carrying out of Smethurst's sentence. Time went by, and only 48 hours before the appointed day, the Home Secretary received the reply from Sir Benjamin Brodie. The Home Secretary made his decision.
After a very careful and anxious consideration of all the facts, I have come to the conclusion there is sufficient doubt of the prisoner's guilt to render it my duty to advise the grant to him of a free pardon, which will be restricted to the particular offence of which he stands convicted. It is my intention to institute a prosecution against him for bigamy. The necessity which I have felt for advising Her Majesty to grant a free pardon in this case has not, as it appears to me, arisen from any defects in the constitution or proceedings of our criminal tribunals. It has arisen from the imperfection of medical science and from the fallibility of judgment in an obscure malady, even of a skillful and experienced medical practitioners.
And thus the Home Secretary managed to get himself out of a dilemma by annoying the medical experts on both sides, who were at last unanimous on one point. They deeply resented the Home Secretary's remarks. The law didn't waste any time, and in point of fact, Dr. Smethurst was brought up on a charge of bigamy before his pardon had been confirmed. In the course of his defense, Dr. Smethurst's counsel alluded to this pardon.
I am sure the jury will agree with me that the prisoner ought to be now treated upon the footing that he is perfectly innocent of the crime of murder. And I cannot help expressing my opinion that the Home Secretary has done himself great honor by the investigation he has made, and which has resulted in his advising Her Majesty to grant the prisoner a free pardon.
If I may interrupt, I must say that the learned counsel is hardly justified in making the observation he has done with regard to the innocence of the prisoner of the crime of murder. The pardon is no more a certificate of innocence than a verdict of not guilty. Silence.
Throughout these proceedings, Dr. Smethurst didn't utter a single word. After all, there was very little for him to say.
You have found the prisoner guilty on this charge, and I have consulted with the officers of the court upon the subject, and they have concurred with me that the sentence I am about to pronounce is a proper one, and that is that you be imprisoned and kept to hard labor for 1 year.
And that, you might think, would be the last appearance in the court of law of our friend, the doctor. Far from it. Having had so much trouble over the little matter of Isabella Banks's will, Dr. Smethurst was not likely to forget it. And having completed his year's vacation at Her Majesty's expense, he returned to the battle determined to get his dues. He produced the famous will and endeavored to prove it. Sister Louisa claimed that it had been procured by undue influence and control of the plaintiff, and that her sister had not been of sound mind. Once again, the old story was told in court.
After Dr. Smethurst was taken into custody for the first time, I went immediately to my sister. She thanked me for my kindness and wished me to be with her. I was with her until just before she died. Except on that occasion, I never had any private communication with her.
I am not able to assign any natural cause for her death. I had ordered medicines principally of a soothing character. None of the medicines I ordered would account for the appearances that were exhibited. Certainly not.
In my opinion, the symptoms of the deceased were not reconcilable with a case of slow arsenical poisoning. There was an absence of several symptoms I should expect to find in such a case.
I believe that her death was occasioned by the administration of some irritant poison, such as arsenic, antimony, or corrosive sublimate.
The old story. But you see, they couldn't really prove it one way or the other. And Dr. Smethurst again had the benefit of the doubt. The court ordered probate of the will to be granted to the plaintiff. In other words, he got the money too. Well, Percy, what do you think about the case?
I know one thing, Clive. It couldn't happen today.
I should hope not. But why exactly do you say that?
Well, you must remember this case occurred in 1859. Since then, the scientific tests for arsenic have been so greatly advanced that any doubt on the presence of the poison will be removed. Today, it can be detected in the hair or the fingernails. Of course, there was the interim period.
You mean, Percy, we might have got away with it? But how?
That's one of the secrets of Scotland Yard.
After hearing Percy Hoskins, I think you'll agree that it may be a very good thing, too, that nice, kind Dr. Smethurst lived when he did, nearly 90 years ago. Well, that's all for now. But Percy Hoskins and I will be back again soon to tell you some more of the secrets of Scotland Yard. Meanwhile, this is Clive Brook saying goodbye and pleasant dreams.